Welcome back to This is a Commander channel, where this is a Commander channel, and today I'm going to talk about Commander Tough Rules and Cool Interactions, episode 41. Today's episode is going to ask the question, what exactly can I do when I control a player? But specifically, we're going to take a look at this question in regards to one specific card that does this effect, as out of all the cards in Magic that grant this effect, it is the one that you're most likely to see in your average game of Commander. The card I'm referring to is Opposition Agent, so let's take a look at what the card actually does. Opposition Agent has Flash, meaning you can cast it at any time you could play an instant, but the two main abilities are that you control your opponents while they're searching their libraries, and then it also says, while an opponent is searching their library, they exile each card they find. You may play those cards for as long as they remain in exile, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast them. So, before we get into the specifics of Oppo Agent, let's talk about what it means to be able to control a player in general. Now, if I were to cover everything about controlling another player, this section of the video alone would take around 20 or 25 minutes. So we're not going to go into that much depth with it. I'm going to touch on the things that I think will be more relevant to your average game of Commander. If you would like to read more into the aspects of controlling another player, you can find it in the section 718 in the Comprehensive Rules. Okay, so first off, while you're controlling another player, you make all choices and decisions for that player that the game would allow for them to, and also that the game makes them choose. You cannot not do things that the game requires them to do. So you can't just decide to not draw a card at the start of their turn during the draw step. That must be an action that happens. If they have a creature that is goated, then you can't just decide to skip their combat. But you can decide to not play a land for turn. You could decide to not cast any spells. If they have spells like targeted removal in their hand, as long as it doesn't restrict you from targeting a permanent that you don't own, in this case they own, then you can cast their own removal spells on their own permanents. Now, you cannot just discard cards for no reason or sacrifice permanents for no reason, but if they have an effect out that is a free sack outlet or a free discard outlet, then you can just keep using those over and over, as long as you can keep paying their cost. Even something that has you paying life to activate can be done by you as the controlling player. So there are other things that you can do as the one controlling the player, which is look at things that you're not typically able to see. Any zones or cards that are hidden to you as an opponent of the controlled player, now you can see them. Most obviously, that includes the cards that are in their hand, but if they have any morph creatures out, then you can take a look at what they are. If you have cards in exile face down that they're able to look at, now you get to look at them. Did they foretell a card? You can peek at what it is. One thing that is very important for this format of Commander is that while you're controlling a player, if their commander were to ever change zones, the state-based action that lets the owner of that commander decide whether or not to send their commander to the command zone is a decision that they, the controlled player, must make, which means you as the controlling player will get to decide. So if you want to be mean, you can just let their commanders stay in their graveyard if they aren't running recursion. Or if it's been exiled, then you can just leave it in exile. For those rare occasions that it's shuffled into their library, then you can just let it stay in that library. I wouldn't typically suggest this if you want to keep being friends with this player, but that is up to you. So that about sums up the more weird things that are all covered under controlling a player. So now to cover exactly what all this means in regards to card like Oppo Agent. When you flash it out in response to your opponent cracking their fetch land or casting their tutor spell, what all can you actually do while you're controlling that player? Before I do dive into this answer, I would like to add a cool little factoid that other than Oppo Agent, I believe there is only one other card currently printed in Magic as of making this episode that lets you control a player for a limited amount of time that is shorter than their full turn, and that card is Word of Command. Feel free to pause the video to read it, it's a lot of text, or look it up later. It's an interesting old card from the ABU era on Magic, and the Magic card itself, funny enough, the artist is one of the guys that helped to design the mana symbols and the back of all of the Magic cards that the game still uses today. So interesting little factoid there. Okay. Enough little factoids for now. So while you are controlling opponents during their search, what all can you actually do? So if they control a Phyrexian altar, can you sacrifice all of their creatures? If they have out a Harnfell, Horn of Bounty, the flip side of Burgi, can you just discard their whole hand? If they have out a Necropotence or Necropotence, which one are you? Are you a Necropotence or are you a Necropotence kind of person? Can you just keep paying their life points away? Can you tap down all their mana dorks, their mana rocks, and their lands to float and possibly waste that mana? So these are some questions here, and sadly, the answer to all of these questions is a no. The problem with all of these actions is that they all require for a player to have priority, and even things like activating mana abilities requires you to have priority. And the problem with Opposition Agent here is that you're in the middle of resolving a spell or ability that has caused or allowed the player to search their library. And players do not receive priority, nor does the game even check for state-based actions again until a spell or ability has fully resolved. What you can do while controlling a player during the search is that you could look at all of those hidden things that you were not allowed to see before. So their hand, face-down cards that they're allowed to look at, and cards they've foretold, etc. Those kind of things. But that's about it. So if a player ever tries to Oppo Agent you and then do a bunch of negative actions, you can tell them that no, that's not something that they're allowed to do. One last thing that I do want to cover specifically about the Oppo Agent, in regards to what you're able to search for, you do have to follow the requirements for what they're searching for. If they crack their Terramorphic Expanse to search for a basic land, you can't just search for a creature card and exile that for you to play later. You do have to search for the basic land. Also, if their search instructions state a quality of the card to find, such as a color or a card type, you may have the opponent not find any cards, or as we usually call it, fail to find. If the search is simply for a number of cards without stating a quality, then you must have them find that many cards, or as many as possible at least if their library doesn't contain that many cards. Anyhow, that's all I've got for today's episode. As always, I hope that all of you found this video to be entertaining at least, and I hope that a few of you maybe even learned something about the crazy rules in this great game of Magic. Have a good one. Ta-ta.